Now, when Randy invited me to come on this tonight, I knew exactly what I wanted to tell you, because if I had to pick one thing that was the most beneficial to me, that really made a difference, it was adjustment layers and layer masks. And these two things kind of fit together hand in hand. So we're going to start off with adjustment layers and then add on layer masks to that, so that when we combine these two things together, it gives you a very powerful feature in Photoshop. So we're going to get on to Photoshop here in just a moment. All right, so I've got Photoshop here on my screen now, and we're going to start off with what I call my three-step process for image correction. And I recommend doing this on all images, because even though the images look pretty good when they come right out of the camera, they might benefit from some adjustments. And this is one photo that this is definitely the case. And we're going to use adjustment layers to make the whole thing happen. Now, the whole advantage of adjustment layers is that we're not making the changes directly on the photograph. So, for example, if you were to go into the image menu to adjustments and make adjustments under there, you're actually changing the picture, and it's irreversible later on. So what we're doing here, the concept is, it's like laying a filter that's adjustable on top of the picture. You can take it away later, you can change it, you can add more. It's totally adjustable forever. Well, the adjustments panel is over here on the right-hand side of the screen, and I'm going to zoom in on this just a little bit so you can see it better. And there's a whole bunch of these little buttons here, but the good news is you don't have to memorize what they are, because when you put your mouse over one, it tells you the name of it up in the upper left. And there's really only a few of these that we need, because I've declared most of these lame. So here's how we're going to start. And of course, there's a million ways to do everything, but I'm going to show you my favorite way. Now, first of all, we do not start with brightness and contrast because it's lame. Instead, I recommend just moving over the next button, which is levels. The thing I like about levels is we're all familiar with it. We've seen it on the back of our camera a million times. We've got what's known as a histogram here. And this is really a bar graph with 256 bars showing all the tones in the picture from black to white. And one thing I want you to understand, and I know you may have heard otherwise at other places, but the shape of this thing is of no consequence to us. The shape of it depends on what it's a picture of. What we really care about here is the width of it. It's the tonal range. The hallmarks of a good, perfectly exposed image are that we have really dark shadows, but they still have some details in them. And we have nice, really bright highlights, but again, they still have some detail in them. We definitely do not want blown out highlights. Now, let me take a little sidebar here for just a second. Talking about this histogram, when you're out working in the field, you can trust this to evaluate your exposure on the back of your camera. If you just look at the little screen and try to use that to evaluate your exposure, you're probably going to be in for some disappointment, because if you're out in the bright sun, it's going to look too dark, or if you're inside, it's going to look too bright, but you can trust your histogram. And if the graph is running off the right-hand side of the scale, it's overexposed. That means that there are highlights being blown out, and blown out highlights cannot be restored, not even with Photoshop. So we want to make sure, whatever we do, if at all possible, our little histogram graph stops just shy of the end of the scale, which is white. Shadows are always on the left, highlights are always on the right. So anyway, okay, we'll get back on Photoshop now. That's just my little sidebar about exposure. We'll start with the shadows, and there's a little slider right underneath the histogram here. And you might say you have the Alt or the option to do a little trick here, because our monitor may or may not be perfect. But if you hold down the Alt button or the option, depending on which brand of computer you're on, and then click and hold down on this slider, the image will disappear temporarily. But watch what happens when I drag this slider over towards the middle of the histogram. It's showing a preview in color of the shadows are getting clogged up. And what I mean by clogged up, they just got no detail in them whatsoever. So what we want is when there's some specks appearing like this, that's where you would stop. Now we'll do the same thing with the highlights. Once again, holding down the Alt or the Option button, and then grabbing this highlight slider and moving it over towards the center. And you can see as I move this, it's showing us blown out highlights. Now we know we don't want blown out highlights, so we'll drag this back, and where we start seeing some specks appearing like this, little specks are normal, so that's where we stop. And I'd also like to tell you that this middle slider here is for the midtones. Although usually, if you get the highlights and the shadows right, everything else falls into place. So we've got this where our shadows are nice and dark, our highlights are nice and bright. I'm going to go over here to the layers panel, and you can see we've got an adjustment layer has been added. And you probably know if you click the little eyeball on and off, you can see the before and after. Now I know this is on the internet, so it might be difficult to see, but this is already a substantial improvement because it's got the right tonal range. So we do its tonal range first with levels. Then we go on to color balance. And the reason we always do this in the order I'm going to present it is because if the levels are wrong, it'll induce a color cast sometimes. So if you fix the color, then you do levels, then sometimes you have to go back and do color again. We want to save time on this. So we do levels first, then color balance. The color balance one is the second button down in the adjustments panel. It looks like scales for, get it, for balance, scales? Haha. Now this thing is designed, by the way, the humor is not going to get any better. So if you didn't like that joke, you're out of luck. The thing I like about this, you don't have to understand color theory to make it work. All you have to do, and this is really subjective. Color is totally subjective. You make those colors look good to you. You're the artist, you make the decision, and they'll look good to everybody else. So here's what you do. You just start with the top slider. Drag it a little bit to the left. Does it look better or worse? I think it looks better. Drag it a little bit to the right. Okay, that's worse. Then put it back to the middle at 0, or as close as I can get it. Go to the next one. All right, that looks worse. Okay, that looks better. Now I'll put that one back to 0. And finally, the bottom one, neither one really looked any good on that. So I'll put that back to 0. But now I know something. I know that cyan made it look better, and I know that green made it look better. So now we know if we just go up here and add some cyan until it looks better, and add some green until it looks better, we can kind of play with these a little bit, it's going to look great. Because if you're like most people, you can't just bring a picture up and go, oh yeah, it needs more green or whatever. This way you can find out for sure and see for yourself what's going to work better and not just trust a guess. Now let's take a look at the eyeball. Did you realize how much of a color cast that thing had? That thing was horrible. All right, now here's step number 3. So we do the levels first, we do color balance second, and then finally, up here in the adjustments panel again, V for Vibrance. Now, Vibrance adjusts the intensity of the color. Vibrance and saturation are just two different ways of increasing or decreasing the intensity of color. I like to use the Vibrance, it works better, but you can experiment with both and see for yourself which you prefer. You drag it to the right, it increases the intensity of the colors. Drag it to the left, it decreases the intensity of the colors. Now there's a trend right now in photography towards going way too far with this. So let's not encourage that. So drag them up a little bit until it looks good to you. Again, you're the artist, you're gonna decide. So you make it look good to you and everybody else will like it too. All right, so that's a 3-step process. Sometimes it doesn't need any of them, but it's worth spending a few moments to check. If you were to do this 3-step process, once you've done it several times, it does 2 things for you. It gives you a system so it's impossible to mess up, And also, it gives you a very easy way of doing the same thing every time. Now, here's where we started. Here's where we ended up. This would only take us a matter of seconds in real life if we weren't talking during it. So again, before, after. Now here's the beauty of these adjustment layers. Let's say that we print this out and we decide, and maybe it's weeks down the road, and we decide that, oh man, you know, this thing isn't quite the way I'm wanting it to look. We can come back over here to these adjustment layers, double click right on the symbol in the layers panel for the adjustment layer. It comes right up the way we left it. We can go back in here, make further adjustments, and then try printing it again. So they stay live all the time. That's the big advantage of adjustment layers, is that they're literally impossible to mess up. And I like that. All right, so we've got our adjustment layers here. Let's take a look at one of my other kinds of favorite adjustment layers, which is a black and white adjustment layer. All right, so we're going to make a black and white out of this picture here, and I particularly picked this photo because it does not convert well at all. But everybody loves a nice black and white. So let me show you just how powerful this is, and prepare to be amazed. All right, back over here in the adjustments panel. The black and white one, it's in the second row. I'm going to click on that thing, and it will automatically do whatever Photoshop thinks is appropriate. But this is terrible because the subject of the photo are these nice red peppers up here. That's the thing that we want to show. And this whole color thing here, that's looking pretty confusing to me. I don't want to spend an hour with this thing. Well, I'd like to introduce you to the finger. Let me zoom in here so you can see it better on the screen. It's that one right there. We're going to give it the finger. All right. You ready to be amazed? I'll take that as a yes. So check this out. I'm going to click on the finger, and all you have to do is position this over something that you want to change how Photoshop converts it into black and white. So watch. Click and hold down, drag to the left, makes everything that's that color in the picture darker. Drag it to the right, everything that's that color in the picture gets brighter. So you can actually go in here and color by color adjust how it converts into black and white. And that is an incredibly powerful feature. This is something that in time past was impossible to do, because we can go through here with the finger and color by color decide what the tone's going to be for each thing in our photograph. Now, of course, this one's very simple because we've just got the peppers to contend with. But I think that's really an amazing thing. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, Chuck, that's really cool. I'm satisfied with that. But wait, there's more. Everybody loves a nice sepia tone. Well, the black and white adjustment layer allows us to do that as well. There's a little checkbox next to the finger called tint. And when you check on it, it makes a really ugly sepia tone. But the good news is there's a color swatch right next to it that you can click on, and you can choose any color you want. You could go with anything. But in this case, we'll stick with a regular sepia tone, and we'll just drag it over here to where it's a little less intense. All right, I think that looks good, so I'll click OK on that. Now notice over here in the layers panel, we've got an adjustment layer for black and white. And that means later on, we can always double click on it. It'll bring the controls back exactly the way we left them, and we can make further changes. Now imagine this. Imagine we've got a whole series of pictures. We want to do some really cool black and whites, and we want to make sepia tones out of them, but the sepia tone needs to match on every single one of them because they're all going on the same wall. Well, here's another really great feature. We've got this tint all set up here. Well, you can actually make your own little presets. There's one that I made previously. Now, of course, That wasn't for this photo. But up here in the little tiny menu, I call it the hamburger menu because that's what it looks like to me because I'm hungry. Save black and white preset. And of course, load black and white preset to bring them back. But when you save them, they end up here in the list anyway. Now let me throw away this adjustment layer and show you one more thing. Because some of you folks are as old as I am in here, and you might have used black and white film at some point in history. Well, if you've used black and white film, you might recognize the names of some of these filters here. And if you do, these are filters that correspond to film filters that you may have used in black and white photography. So I just wanted to point that out to you as well, because it's something that's definitely worth knowing. All right, so we're going to keep moving here. I hope you're having a great time with this. I know I am. All right, in this case, we're going to combine using adjustment layers with masks. So let's just say, for example, the color of the car is the issue. It needs to be a little bit different color, and we need to make some adjustments. But when we do that, it's going to mess up the rest of the picture. So watch this. Let's just say we'll use a hue and saturation adjustment layer and change the hue. Hue is a fancy word for color. Let's say the car was supposed to be this color. Well, of course, that messes up everything else in the picture, but I'd like to introduce you to layer masks. Take a look over here in the layers panel. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. So we've got this adjustment layer, and adjustment layers always come with this white rectangle here that's called a layer mask. And I'd like you to see how there's a little frame around it right now. Now see how the frame's around this part? Not by clicking, now it's around this. So there's really two parts to this layer. There's the adjustment layer and the mask that goes with it. So if you want to work on the mask, you have to click on the mask and have this little frame around it so that Photoshop will know what you're doing. Now, the concept is very, very simple. It's that anything that's white shows the effects of that layer, and anything that's black hides the effect of the layer. That's pretty easy to remember. If it's black, if it's dark, you can't see it. So I'm going to use the paintbrush tool, and you'll notice down here in the swatches, black and white are chosen. Well, white is in the front, so if I paint with white, well, the mask is already white. It's already showing the effects of this layer. But if I click the little button to switch the swatches, the swatch switcher, and I start painting, I want you to notice something here. What I've painted on the picture is being represented here on the layer mask. Black hides it, white shows it. You can see that way. Okay, so I painted that area. I didn't mean to. Hey, no big deal. We could switch the brush to white and paint it right back. So you can probably see where we're headed with this thing. All we have to do is just make everything outside this car black. I don't want to sit here and paint the whole thing, so we're going to try and be efficient about it. So why don't we do this? Instead, we'll take this mask here and make it the opposite. We'll invert it. Command-I or Control-I on your keyboard will invert it. Well, now it's all black. Oops, sorry about that. Well, now it's black, so really all we have to do is with white paint in the parts of the car. Now you can see this is really quick and easy, and the beauty of it is it's impossible to mess up, because if you go outside the lines, no big deal. You switch your color swatches and just do a little cleanup. So it's very, very easy to go in and make selective changes using adjustment layers. Now, I'm not going to bore you with me doing this whole thing. I know you're probably thinking, oh man, I'd just love to sit here for about 30 minutes while Chuck paints this whole car out. Well, not going to do it, just a little piece. Now here's the beauty of it. Again, because it's an adjustment layer, it's adjustable forever. We could come back to this at a later date, double click right on the adjustment layer here in the layers panel and adjust the hue. And you can see here, you've got an infinite amount of control here. And here's one other thing that a lot of people don't know. Let's say that we've got the color changed version of our car, but we also need the original too. So instead of having to have two separate files, check this out. With this adjustment layer, we can turn it off. We've got our original, we could print it like this. We turn our adjustment layer back on, we can print it the way it appears now in this color, because layers that are turned on and off also do or don't print. That's probably not the right way to say it, but a layer that's turned off does not print, is what I'm trying to say. All right, well, I hope this makes sense, because the ability to use layer masks opens up a whole new world of very efficient, easy, adjustable work, because you can always go back and change it. And the whole key to all this stuff and the whole underlying theme is that we want to do our editing in a way that's non-destructive. We want to do everything in a way where we could go back later and fix it or change it, because who knows, we might change our mind later on. All right, let's move along and kind of take the next step with our layer masks. I saw some work that Ben Wilmore made popular, where he had a bunch of photographs out west that were way better than this one. And what he did was he made the subject of the photo, the colors a little bit more intense, but took everything in the background and reduced the intensity of the color. Well, it's a really cool look, and it's a really great way to show how we can use adjustment layers and masks to selectively change areas of the picture. Now, I already took the time earlier to make a selection. So I'm going to go under the select menu and load selection. I made one for the sky. And I'll also go back under select menu to load selection. And also made one for the ground. All right, so now we've got a selection here. And if I make an adjustment layer right now, because there's a selection, Photoshop's going to know that I probably want to have a mask. So check this out. I'm going to go to the Vibrance, and you can see here, it's added the mask, and the mask is based on what was selected. So I'm going to really overdo this just for the sake of clarity on your video screen. So I'm going to really reduce the saturation of everything except the subject of the photo, which is this stuff. And you can see that here it is on the mask that's being represented there. But now I want to increase the saturation of everything else. So let's do that. I'm going to make another adjustment layer for Vibrance and run the saturation up on that. Now you'll notice, and I'm going to overdo this for the sake of clarity, but you'll notice it's doing the whole picture. But we could take this same mask here and copy it over here. The way you do it, if you just want to move it, you just drag it. But if you want to make a copy while you move it, you hold down the Alt button on the keyboard or the Option button on the keyboard and drag it up there. Replace it with the one you just dragged. Yes, that's exactly what we want. So now we've got this mask, but it's exactly the opposite of what we really wanted. We want to affect the stuff and not the background. Well, I mentioned before that we can inverse that mask. That's Command if you're on a Mac, or Control if you're on Windows, I, the letter I. So check this out. Now we've got the background, being desaturated separately. I'll turn that back on, from the foreground. So we've got two different masks doing two different things, and you can mix and match these any way you want. It's just really limited only by your imagination. It's got infinite amount of possibilities. So I've got one more thing I want to show you here. I think this is probably the best thing ever for layer masks. All right, so we've got this picture here. We want to do some burning and dodging on it. And I've got to give credit where credit is due. Clyde Butcher taught me how to do this. And if you're familiar with him, you know that he does a tremendous amount of burning and dodging to make his pictures perfect. So here's how we do it, or here's how I do it anyway. I use a curves adjustment layer for this. And we'll do a dodge layer first. And just in case you're not familiar with these darkroom terms, dodging is to selectively lighten areas of a picture, whereas burning is to selectively darken areas of the picture. So I'm just going to grab this curve here and grab it until the dark stuff's a lot lighter. How's that for scientific? I'll show you why it's not scientific in a minute. Now, because the mask is white, it's doing the whole picture. I think I'd like to turn the whole thing off. So if we fill that mask with black, if I make black the foreground color and Alt or Option delete, it'll fill that mask with the foreground color, in this case being black. So that whole adjustment layer is being hidden. It's still there, we just can't see it. Now I'm going to add another curves adjustment layer. I'm going to do the opposite and drag this one down until the stuff's kind of dark. Again, not scientific, but you'll see why it matters in a minute. All right, so this is going to be my burning layer. And again, I want to turn off that layer so we can selectively use it. So once again, Alt or Option delete to fill that mask with the color. And I want to remind you, if you're accidentally clicked where the frame is around this part of the layer, it won't work. You have to click on the mask. So that's really easy to forget. So just make yourself a mental note of that. So now we've got two layers that do two separate things. And if we were to take the paintbrush tool and have a nice soft round brush, if we're to paint white, so which layer was this? I don't even remember now. Okay, that was the burn layer. So anything we want to darken up, we would use this layer with a brush painting white. So a few things that I think might look better darkened is maybe, you know, down here along the jawline a little bit to kind of separate. That's looking a little better. Separate that. These jewelry here is a little too bright. We could just kind of contour things a little better by darkening in. And it helps to separate different things. Again, putting a shadow under that gives it a little bit more depth. This is a little bright through here. You can just go through here and just kind of knock it down a little bit. Now, I'm using a pressure-sensitive tablet because it gives you just a tremendous amount of control, because how hard you press controls how much it darkens. That's why it didn't have to be real scientific when I dragged that curve, because we can just do it as much as or as little as necessary. Now, if you don't have a pressure-sensitive tablet, you can still do the same thing. Just use your mouse, but go up to the options bar at the top of the screen and reduce the opacity down to about 30%. Then you can go over it multiple times to build it up. All right, so now on to the dodge layer. Again, you know, this photo was done with just one light, so there's nothing to separate this dark from the dark background. So we could go in here and kind of lighten that up. Now, of course, I'm going outside the lines. That's a really great thing because I can change my brush back to black, make it a little smaller, and go back in here and clean it up. Oh man, that makes life easy. All right, so switch back to white. Again, we're dodging, so we'll kind of bring out a little bit in the hair here, bring some of this detail out in the lace around the eyes. Brighten up the highlights here to make this look a little more three-dimensional. Maybe a tiny bit on the lips. And anything where we need to kind of separate things. So take a look at this. Just with this tiny bit of work, just this little bit that I've shown you. Before, after. And that only took moments. If this was a real life job, I'd spend a little bit of time on this, and I'd really go in here and really spend a little time. Burning and dodging makes a difference between a photograph that's really good and one that's great. There is nothing that makes a bigger difference, but it's subtle at the same time. All right, so again, burning and dodging. Now, if you're into using actions, which I am, who doesn't love action? I'm going to take away these two layers. I made a little action that if you email me, I will be happy to send it to you, that I called my Chuck's Portrait Retouching Set, where it actually adds a sharpening layer, burning and dodging layer, and if you were in my little class the other night, the concealer layer, all at once. So you don't even have to go to the adjustments panel at all. So all this is here for you automatically. All right, so I know I've given you a ton of information in a really short time. I'm going to go back to where we can see each other. And if any of you have any questions, I will hopefully have an answer. You can feel free to unmute yourself. If you have any questions, you can just speak right up. Randy, thank you so much for inviting me tonight.
Oh, thank you, guys. Thank you so much for doing this for us. I do have a question for you. We were talking about adjustments, your adjustments layers. I find that for me, the curve layer is probably one of the most powerful adjustment layers in there. How do you feel about the curve layer?
I agree. And I think a lot of people kind of shy away from the curves adjustment layer because it's a little scientific and there's not really, it's not as intuitive as a lot of the other ones. But I say it's impossible to mess up. Experiment with it. There's nothing that can possibly go wrong. If you mess it up, you delete the layer. It's no big deal. But I really think it's something worth learning. There's tons of videos on YouTube. And of course, Randy's somebody that you could ask for help. I'm happy to help.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people in our group that know a lot about Photoshop.
I find that, to me, that's probably the most powerful one. I can relight images using a curve layer. I can do color corrections. I can do selective color corrections with that layer and be very precise. So you were just talking about, and I just, you didn't talk much about that one. And that's just, to me, one of my favorite ones is that right there.
I agree with you, Randy. And as a matter of fact, every single thing that I showed you could be accomplished with only curves adjustment layers. Yeah. But I like to teach the things that are easier. Easy is good, as long as it produces good results.
Yeah. Do we have some more questions? Does anybody else have a question for Chuck?
This is Scott. Chuck.
Hey, Scott.
Regarding color, does anybody here, or do you ever use like a data color type software to make sure your screen's calibrated?
Yes, I do. I've got a little spider is the one I use that just kind of hangs in front of the monitor and it goes through its little cycle. And you're supposed to do it every couple of weeks. Yeah. Of course, I usually forget. But here's something that's it's kind of an issue for me because I like to print things out. And the trouble is that our monitors can show colors that are brighter and more saturated than what our printers are capable of reproducing. So, it's a different medium. The LCD monitor is never going to match ink on paper because it's a different medium. So, I'm kind of old school. I'm a old person, I guess. And I just do it the old-fashioned way. I'll make a print. If I don't like it, I'll make some adjustments and make another print. Just like we used to do in the darkroom.
Mm-hmm. But I have to say,
Randy,
Scott,
you probably have a different point of view on that because
I
you're
do.
a lot more scientific than me.
I calibrate my monitor probably every couple of weeks, if I remember. Sometimes a little longer, but I do that. The reason being is that at least that is a baseline guide for the printing. Okay, you're going to be then embedding that ICC profile and sending it to the lab or to the printer, which is going to interpret it to their ICC profile. So for me, yes, that's one of the best things, one of the things I have to do. I mean, because mine is going out. I don't print my stuff that often. I mean, I print prints for me or for art, whatever, but most of my stuff is going to be going out to a client. So I have to give them the best possible chance of reproducing that look. And so by having that embedded ICC profile, they have the best chance for that. So, because I rarely print for a client because I'm a commercial guy. So, I do it that way.
Thanks, Randy.
Yeah,
I agree, Randy. Most of my work today is reproduced. Most of it's reproduced in Tampa Bay Magazine. That's a CMYK process, which can't possibly achieve the colors we can see on our monitors. In CMYK, you only have 4 f-stops of information that can go on paper. Your monitor can show you 9. Your camera can capture more than that. So it's part of our job as professionals is to get the picture looking good in whatever final medium it's going to be presented in.
Yeah.
So you have to be aware of that from the time that you start making the photograph.
And you can do soft proofing to get a good idea.
Sure can.
I've done things with blurb books that I want for promotional things and stuff like this, and I soft proof all the stuff. I do the conversions to CMYK myself so that I have some more control over it as much as possible. So, I mean, soft proofing will help doing that, doing the conversions yourself. Getting the ICC profile for who's going to be doing the printing is even better, because then you can, you can convert it to their profiles. That's going to give you a better chance of getting, the reproduction that you want.
And that's under the view menu at the top of your screen.
Yeah. More and more printers are actually aware of the fact that ICC profiles are part of the workflow today.
No.
For a long time, you'd say ICC profile to a printer and they'd look at you like you had 2 heads.
Yeah, well, that's when we had separations that we had to deal with a long time ago. So, anybody else got some questions for Chuck?
I have a question.
Yes.
I understood years ago that they had made some changes to vibrancy. When you talked about, use vibrant or saturation, whichever one you like, it was my understanding that they changed it so that if you used the vibrant, that it didn't alter the flesh tones in people. Does anybody know anything about that?
I do. And this is my understanding of it. And Randy, of course, you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. But saturation increases the intensity of the colors across the board. It's just a straight mathematical formula. It increases everything equally. Whereas when Adobe came out with Vibrance, they figured out, well, some colors benefit from Vibrance or from more saturation, and some colors don't, like skin tones, for example, and earth tones. So they decided that those colors would be a little bit protected, whereas the other colors, the more saturated colors, get more saturation.
Okay, that's the way I understood it. I just want to make sure that was true.
Yeah,
I mean, that's why I like Vibrance better, because it
Right.
does it in a lot more intelligent manner.
I use saturation myself very little. I use Vibrance a lot more. I mean, with most of my stuff, I'm pushing Vibrance up about 30%. And if I need a little bit of saturation, I'll bump that up just a tiny bit. but I rarely touch saturation now unless the image has the color in there that really, there's a reason to do it now. Let's put it that way. I find that between Vibrance, especially when you're working with raw images, Vibrance, and if you go into the hue, saturation, luminance, most of the time one of the things that we want to do is darken our skies, and that area, that hue, saturation, if you lower the luminance and bump saturation, and actually I always change the hue a little bit, you'll find that you get great skies that way. And that's really where a lot of people were really looking for saturation with skies. And I found that even before they came up with Vibrance is where I'd really try to work on my skies.
Yeah, that's about what I do.
That's what's really fun about Photoshop. There's just a million techniques and tricks and tips and things you can continue to learn about, throughout the whole rest of your career and continue expanding.
And the rest of it is, we used to buy televisions years ago, and one person liked RCA, I liked Zenith because I liked the color. So we all have a different visual of what we're looking for.
Absolutely right.
That's very true. Years ago, I was a customer service manager at a Pro Lab back when everybody was shooting film. And every printer, every young lady we had in the print rooms saw color differently. We had to profile their machines for them so that we would put out a consistent product toward the end of the day. And we had to do that every week.
Mm-hmm.
And if Sally decided to print on Susan's machine, we had to redo the calibration so she could.
And also what you eat and the color of your clothing, because your brain takes that color in.
Sure. And the space in which you work. If your office is painted a particular color,
right,
it's going to change the way you perceive the color on your monitor.
So, Jenny, are you trying to say that I see everything in chocolate?
That's right.
Okay.
It's the red in the wine.
Yeah.
They used to say at the labs that they couldn't eat spaghetti, spinach. There were certain things because it changed the way they saw color.
That's why I recommend vodka.
Yeah, I see everything through Chardonnay. Yeah.
If you drink enough of it, it doesn't make any
difference, does it?
No. Anyway. Well, guys, unless we got any more questions, I just want to say to Chuck, thank you so much, sir, for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great job, Chuck.